So up until that point, 2015, I think my poetry had really focused in on place and places, locations, geographical locations, and our relationship with locations and places as human beings, and the sort of phenomenology of that interaction. And that was a sort of intended direction, I think. It sort of evolved and then became an intention. But this poetry collection was a decisive sort of move away from that, and as such was a one-off, because I definitely returned to my theme of places and human relationship with after this. I had split up with my Russian girlfriend Yulia of some 5 years. It may have been a bit still on and off, but essentially it was over, and she was still in London. I'd returned to Havant, and I was basically looking after my mother, doing various chores for her, staying at her house, because she had increasing care needs as she got older. So I actually became quite isolated living there, and I wasn't doing day-to-day work, so I didn't have work colleagues to interact with. I didn't have any sort of social life. I lost contact with friends. I went through a phase of a year or more where I didn't have a computer, probably for the first time in my life. So I didn't have internet access, couldn't email people, didn't have a lot of money, so I was not really able to make phone calls particularly, or text messages. And I guess in amongst all of that, a lack of social life and interaction with other people, I was kind of lonely as well for female company. And so this was a bit of a return to where I was as a teenager, when I was writing songs and started occasionally writing poetry, where it was more like therapy to write a poem than actually doing it for the art form and to push the boundaries of one's particular area of an art form. So yeah, I'm not really pleased or proud of that, but I do quite like some of the poems in here. I think it's quite a nice collection. So what I really did, I was sort of inspired by Sylvia Plath's poem 3 Caryatids Without a Portico, which was an interesting poem. Mainly I liked the title, but I think I was interested in the caryatids thing and the idea of them. Caryatids, although they're statues, for if you're not aware of it, statues in architecture of women of the female form that replace pillars. And I was interested in them, in women as caryatids, because caryatids are depictions of women. of females. So, and I was interested in the flip side of that. So, sort of women as icons and inspirational icons of leadership or creativity or whatever it is, compassion. So that's really where this collection arose from. And so that was therapeutic for me, because it kind of made me feel affection, love, admiration for women, which I needed. Probably the most complicated poetry collection I've written. Because I was using music to inspire me, and I was orating the poems over mostly classical music, to review them and edit them. And I had developed a desire to record poetry over music, something I wanted to do in the future, but I have actually never done that yet, largely because of copyright issues of recording other people's music with your own poetry. So I was also using news stories as well, which I found inspiring about women, particular women. And I'll go through all these in a moment so you can have a look if you're... I don't suppose there are many people out there who are watching this or even interested in researching it, but just so you have the sort of references to look into if you're interested. I mostly can't remember which poems are about which women, but every poem is about a particular woman, usually famous or a woman who has found fame for something in particular. Or is an influencer, internet influencer about a particular subject. So I was using these combinations of inspiration, and I think I was also using an object as inspiration. So what I was trying to do was blend a woman and an object or a thing which is of interest, and then a song, a classical tune as well. I was combining those three into the poem. So although it's mainly about the woman, it's a kind of combinatory thing. And I did go to a play once at the King's Theatre, which was about, I can't actually remember what it was. It might have been Bed Knobs and Broomsticks or something really silly like that, but it was something to do with objects coming to life and beginning to live. And so there's an element of that to this, I think, as well. An example being, I've just looked back at my old files and folders, which I found for research and read for research. And there's a piece on Nightwood Oak, which is a huge oak tree, and I think it's the oldest in the UK, which is down in the New Forest, which I've actually seen. I went to walk down there with Yulia one time, and we went to see the Nightwood Oak. It's very large. It may even be the largest diameter oak as well. So one of these poems, and you may be able to discern it by reading the poems or listening to the poems, is about a woman, the Nightwood Oak, and a particular piece of classical music all combined. So that's how I generated my inspiration, my muse for these poems. So I finished the poetry collection by the looks of things here in October 2015. So the last save on the final poetry file is 20th of October 2015. So I was largely sat in a sort of upright, comfortable upright chair with armrests and so on. Sat next to the radio, playing classical music. Some of it may have been on CD. In my bedroom, what was my bedroom there at my mum's house, and I wrote most of this, well, in fact all of this poetry there, just sat in the corner of the room with a sort of tabletop on my lap, in pen and ink. I wanted to just mention Sylvia Plath and Ted Hughes, which I touched on earlier, because when I'd been living in London with Yulia, we lived in lots of different locations, but one of the places was very near Primrose Hill, right next to it, in fact, which was called Steele's Village, which is where the Observer newspaper founder lived, whose surname was Steele, and that's why it's called Steele's Village. Sylvia Plath and Ted Hughes had lived just around the corner when they were married, and their old house had a plaque on it which said their names and the dates they lived there. And I used to often walk over the little bridge over the railway at the top of Camden there, to Primrose Hill, into Primrose Hill. And that bridge was where Ted Hughes found a fox cub, tucked it in his jacket and walked home with it, which he wrote about in a poem. The house is just around the corner. And there's another house which I used to walk past, so I used to walk past both houses. And the other house is where Sylvia Plath lived, I think after she'd divorced from Ted Hughes. And it's where, unfortunately, she ended her life, in the kitchen, using a cooker. And the terrible thing is, I used to walk past there, and the first time I walked past there and realised which house it was, because I found the address somewhere in one of the books I was reading. May have been Birthday Letters or Ariel's Gift, or I can't remember. It was a biography anyway, not a poetry collection. And I looked down through the basement window, which was at pavement level, and there was downstairs in the basement is the kitchen, and I could see a cooker there, and I thought, oh my goodness. I mean, I'm sure it's not the same kitchen and cooker, but it may be the same room. So anyway, not entirely sure whether the person who lives there knows, but I don't think there's a plaque on that house. Anyway, so, the title of that poem by Sylvia Plath, 3 Caryatids Without a Portico, was, the portico being a porch, was the inspiration for all of this. The interesting thing is, Ted Hughes read that poem, which Sylvia Plath wrote at university, I think. He read that poem before they'd met, and then subsequently, obviously, they met, dated, got married, so on. Tempestuous relationship, which has been much written about. So I was kind of studying them at the time. I lived in Primrose Hill, Steele's Village, Camden, Borough of Camden, and reading some books about them, reading their poetry, and so I was sort of thinking back to that time and those poems that was really the inspiration for this.